For this video, I will summarize the chapters of Sun Tzu's Art of War and list specific points I found more important or impactful. I will add some general advice and historical references. Chapter 1, Initial Estimations. Quote, "Warfare is the greatest affair of the state," Sun Tzu. Tao, broadly speaking, is the way. Tao is often described by Eastern religions as the natural order of the universe, whose character one's intuition must discern to realize the potential for individual wisdom. Tao, while intuitive, is achieved through one's life experiences, as Chinese generals would have plenty of to write about. Sun Tzu phrases many early descriptions in terms of the Tao. He describes the subcomponents of heaven, earth, the generals, and logistics, or the laws of organization. More importantly, he describes generals as encompassing wisdom, credibility, benevolence, courage, and strictness. He goes on to list questions a general may ask himself to determine how to win, like who has stronger forces, who has the better officers, which general is better. These questions reflect the importance of analyzing more minute factors to attain advantages or minimize the effects of the enemy's advantages, because the small tactical advantages will add up to victory even when you are outmatched numerically. He also starts the Art of War by stating the important maxim that warfare is the Tao, or way, of deception. He also lists a set of ways to interact with your enemy to benefit yourself. Display profits to entice them, create disorder in their forces and take them. If they are substantial, prepare for them. If they are strong, avoid them. If they are angry, perturb them. Be deferential to foster their arrogance. If they are united, cause them to be separated. Attack where they are unprepared. Go forth where they will not expect it. And these are the ways military strategists are victorious. They cannot be spoken of in advance. Overall, these maxims are about destroying their advantages and attacking their vulnerabilities. Chapter 2, Waging War. This chapter is about the importance of financing war through regular pricing and payment. Long campaigns will drain the state's resources and the army will grow tired, so Sun Tzu stresses the importance of waging quick and speedy campaigns. If your campaign fails to be speedy, then the local lords will probably revolt during your campaign. Speedier campaigns are also more likely to be successful and return a greater yield in profit. One quote that summarizes Sun Tzu's ideas on waging war and the importance of resources is that 1 bushel of the enemy's foodstuffs is worth 20 of ours. And this quote goes back to destroying the enemy's ability to supply a war effort. Your food efforts are important for sustaining your army, but attaining a small amount of your enemy's foodstuffs can rapidly lead to their destruction, while you will suffer many casualties in taking it. Chapter 3, Planning Offensives. Sun Tzu states that it is better to preserve the enemy army, state, and cities and capture them without destroying them. This is because they can then be used to benefit yourself and your country once you have captured them. Destroying them will simply leave you with rubble. The highest realization of war is to attack plans, then alliances, then their army, then fortified cities. Attacking fortified cities should only be done when absolutely necessary, because it will take long periods of time, which, as Sun Tzu previously established, is likely to lead to revolts and diminished yields. He also gives various strength factor rules. For example, if you have 10 times their number, you should surround them. If you have 5 times their number, you should attack. If you have twice their number, you should divide. If you have equal numbers, you should engage. If you have fewer, you must circumvent them, and if you are outmatched, you should avoid them. Sun Tzu states 3 ways for a ruler to make it difficult for a general to wage war are 1. To tell a general to advance or withdraw with limited knowledge, 2. To direct an army like a civil administration, or 3. To command without understanding tactics. Chapter 4.
Quote,
Military
one who excels
in warfare is able to make himself unconquerable, but cannot necessarily cause the enemy to be conquerable. Sun Tzu advises that if you cannot be victorious, you must go on the defensive. If you can be victorious, then you should attack. This is because defense requires less strength against a similarly numbered force. Another statement that shows Sun Tzu's philosophy about warfare is that, quote, one who is free from error conquers those who are already defeated. This quote describes a general that wins battles before they are fought. A general must first ensure every advantage for his army before he attacks. Chapter 5. Strategic Military Power. Here, Sun Tzu introduces the concept of the unorthodox qi and orthodox cheng. Quote, in general, one engages with the orthodox and gains victory with the unorthodox. Sun Tzu is stating that using unorthodox methods allows for infinite different ways to win, and yet one should still maintain the orthodox methods of fighting as a backbone for your army's maneuvers. Sun Tzu once again talks about the nature of using deception and the different details as a matter of the strategic configuration of power. Quote, the illusion of chaos comes from order. The illusion of fear comes from courage. The illusion of weakness comes from strength. The illusion of order comes from disorder. Sun Tzu is illustrating how an army can display itself to be one quality when really it is the other. These quotes describe how Sun Tzu centers deception at the art of war. An army must always present itself the opposite of the way it actually is. Sun Tzu poetically compares a brilliant general's ability with rolling boulders down a tall mountain, meaning that with enough brilliance, he or she can destroy anything. Chapter 6. Vacuity and Substance. Whoever takes the battleground first will be at ease. Success is about compelling others to do what you want or fight where and how you want them to. Quote, if the enemy is tired, you can exhaust him. If he is well fed, you can make him hungry. These maxims from Sun Tzu are about making the enemy fight how and where you want them to. You should never fight an enemy on their terms. A good general will decide the terms of battle as how they are advantageous to his army and will trick the enemy into fighting on his terms. To force a battle, attack possessions or objectives that the enemy must defend or rescue. To avoid battle, create a strong defense and thwart attempts to outmaneuver it. These are specific examples as to how a general can make the enemy fight in a way that is advantageous to your own army. Sun Tzu also briefly talks about attacking smaller detachments of the enemy army. The army's disposition of force is like water. Water flows according to the terrain. This is a reminder that the general must change his strategy and tactics according to the individual scenario and time. Chapter 7. Military Combat. Know the tactics of the circuitous and the direct. Use local guides to gain advantage from terrain. Sun Tzu talks about the importance of communicating orders to soldiers, and this section reflects the ancient technology by stating that orders are communicated using only flags and drums, whereas today, radios are the most common use for unit communication. Sun Tzu then states various maxims about gaining certain tactical advantages for your army. These are: be tranquil and await the clamorous, be near to await distance, with the rested await the fatigued, with the sated await the hungry, do not fall for feigned maneuvers of the enemy, and do not approach high mountains. Chapter 8. The 9 Changes. This chapter is about going into detail about different types of territory. Do not encamp in entrapping terrain, which is where your army has few exit routes. Unite with your allies on full terrain, which is land that your armies can muster upon or is in the center of the strategic areas. Do not remain on isolated terrain. which is terrain that is where you are unable to access different parts of your army or get help from your allies. Make strategic plans on encircled terrain. On failed terrain, you must do battle. There are roads that are not followed. There are armies that are not attacked. There are fortified cities that are not assaulted. There is terrain for which one does not contend. There are commands from the ruler that are not accepted. Sun Tzu also talks about subjugating feudal lords with potential harm and laboring them with work. Sun Tzu advises to make them race after profits, which was a strategy that was pursued very well by Louis XIV by keeping all his feudal lords working to serve Louis at his massive palace at Versailles. It is likely that Louis XIV was so concerned about his lords after a series of rebellions they led against the central government while Louis was only a child. These wars were collectively known as the Fronde. Sun Tzu describes dangerous character traits in generals like being afraid of dying, hastiness, micromanaging, and loving the people, which is presumably enemy people or not willing to let soldiers die. Chapter 9, Maneuvering the Army. To cross mountains, follow the valleys, search out tenable ground, and occupy the heights. Do not climb up mountains to engage the enemy. After crossing a river, distance yourself from it to avoid getting pinned against it. When the enemy is crossing rivers, Sun Tzu advises to attack while half of the enemy has crossed and the other half is on the same bank as you. This has advantages and disadvantages. This strategy is likely to destroy half of the enemy army, allowing the rest of it to escape, whereas a complete victory could be achieved by pitting the entire army against the river. This would be especially beneficial if the enemy were already packed in tight. 3 important and famous river battles are the Granicus, where Alexander the Great violently crossed the Granicus with his elite cavalry directly into the front of the Persian army. He was nearly killed but achieved victory thanks to his number and better quality troops. I should note that he fought this battle because he needed to force a strategic confrontation soon in order to supply his army. The Battle of Issus, where Alexander crossed the Issus River with his phalanx and cavalry into the Persian army. His army lost some coordination while crossing, but their excellent drilling helped keep formation. Friedland. Russian General Bennigsen crossed the Ala River to crush Lannes' opposed corps, but he was too slow. Napoleon arrived with the rest of the army and crushed Bennigsen across the Ala, while his troops tried to flee across ice and destroyed bridges. Sun Tzu advises occupying the high ground and, when crossing marshes, to quickly get away from them. When fighting in marshes, stay in the grass and keep trees at your back. Sun Tzu goes on to describe detailed observations of signs of enemy movements. A large number of trees moving indicates an advance. Birds flying away indicates an ambush. Afraid animals indicate enemy forces are mounting a sudden attack. Dust indicates chariots. Where birds gather, the land is empty. And sending emissaries, or in modern day, truces, ceasefires, etc., indicates they are tired. Sun Tzu also describes observations of the general's army's movements. Soldiers standing on their swords indicates they are hungry. Making noises at night indicate they are afraid. Turbulence in the ranks indicates the general or the officers lack severity. Here I'll quote directly from Sawyer's translation of Sun Tzu. Quote, if you impose punishments on the troops before they have become attached, they will not be submissive. If they are not submissive, they will be difficult to employ. The takeaway from this is that consistent and often orders from the general are required to make the local people submit. Chapter 10, Configurations of Terrain. The major configurations of terrain are accessible, suspended, stalemated, constricted, precipitous, and expansive. Accessible terrain is where we can go forth and the enemy can advance. Sun Tzu's advice is to occupy the heights and improve routes for supplies. Suspended terrain is where we can go forth, but it is difficult to leave. Sun Tzu advises that this is not advantageous ground to occupy. It is especially risky for attacking. Stalemated terrain is not advantageous for either the enemy or yourself to advance in. Sun Tzu's advice is to not go forth and to withdraw. Constricted terrain is terrain where if the army must fully deploy to await the enemy. Sun Tzu's advice is if the enemy occupies them first, do not follow them in. If they don't fully deploy, follow them in. Precipitous terrain has high terrain and a defensive advantage. Sun Tzu's advice is to take the high ground and await the enemy. If the enemy occupies this terrain, then withdraw. Expansive terrain is wide open terrain. Sun Tzu advises that it is difficult to provoke combat here, and it is generally not advantageous. Sun Tzu states that if the officers are angry, then the army will crumble, and if the general is weak and not strict, the army will be easily routed. A general should love the army as his children, then the army will love their general. An army that loves their general will die for him. Physical terrain and psychological terrain are equally important. Sun Tzu, like Machiavelli, describes that poor leadership cannot make up for well-trained troops, and well-trained troops cannot make up for poor leadership. Chapter 11, The 9 Terrains. Here I will start by reading verbatim from Sawyer's translation. When the feudal lords fight in their own territory, it is dispersive terrain. Sun Tzu advises to not engage the enemy here. When they enter someone else's territory, but not deeply, it is light terrain. Sun Tzu advises not to stop on light terrain. If when we occupy it, it will be advantageous to us, while if they occupy it, it will be advantageous to them, it is contentious terrain. Sun Tzu advises, on contentious terrain, do not attack. When we can go and they can also come, it is traversable terrain. On traversable terrain, do not allow your forces to become isolated. Land of the feudal lords surrounded on 3 sides, such that whoever arrives first will gain the masses of all under heaven, is focal terrain. On focal terrain, unite and form alliances with nearby feudal lords. When one penetrates deeply into enemy territory, it is heavy terrain. On heavy terrain, plunder for provisions. Where there are mountains and forests, ravines and defiles, wetlands and marshes, wherever the road is difficult to negotiate, it is entrapping terrain. On entrapping terrain, move through quickly. Where the entrance is constricted, the return is circuitous, and a small number can strike our masses, it is encircled terrain. On encircled terrain, use strategy. Where if one fights with intensity, he will survive, but if he does not fight with intensity, he will perish, it is fatal terrain. On fatal terrain, engage in battle, is Sun Tzu's advice. When you mobilize the army and form strategic plans, you must be unfathomable. Sun Tzu goes on to describe a general and his actions as such. Quote, thus one who excels at employing the army may be compared to the snake. The snake is found on Mount Chang. If you strike the head, the tail will respond. If you strike its tail, the head will respond. If you strike the middle, both the head and tail will react. If I dare ask, can we make the army like the snake? I would say we can. Sawyer's translation also states that, quote, in general, the Tao of an invader is that when one has penetrated deeply into enemy territory, the army will be unified, and the defenders will not be able to conquer you. Sun Tzu states that the prosecution of military affairs lies with learning the enemy's intentions, concentrating strength, striking the army, and killing the general. Quote, attack what they love first, and do not fix time for battle. This refers to a common practice in ancient and early modern times, where generals would set a specified time to start the battle. This can be seen in one of the scenes in the movie Cromwell, where the parliamentary and royalist forces affix a specific time to start the battle. Sun Tzu advises against this because by not fixing a time for battle, you maintain the element of surprise. Chapter 12, Incendiary Attacks. The message of this chapter is to burn the enemy's stuff, immediately attack once the enemy's supplies are burning, and if fires are ignited upwind, do not attack downwind. Chapter 13, Employing Spies. Local spies are people employed from a local district. Internal spies are spies who hold government positions. Double agents is employing the enemy's spies. Expendable spies spread disinformation outside the state. and living spies return with reports. Sun Tzu advises that only a subtle, wise, and benevolent general should employ spies. In World War II, spies were very important but could also be very misleading. Germany's OKH often gave them many false reports, had many double agents in its service, and many of its staff conspired against the state's administration. For a really interesting story, look up the Operation Mincemeat for a story about deceiving about the Allied landings in Sicily. Sun Tzu finally advises that any deceitful spies must be put to death.